Okay. What is your name?
My name is Herbert R. Dietrich.
You can sit here, John.
And when were you born?
I was born March the 15th, 1899 in Clark County, Missouri, near Wyconda, between Wyconda and Luray, Missouri.
Who were your parents?
My parents were Mr. and Mrs. J.C. Dietrich.
Okay, and what did you grow up there when you were born?
No, I was born on a farm, and my father went to Fort Madison, Iowa, and went to work for the Santa Fe. And when I was 3 or 4 years old, we moved to Marceline, Missouri. And my father was a locomotive engineer on the Santa Fe Railroad. And I lived in Marceline, grew up there, graduated from high school. Graduated from high school in 1917.
Oh, when did you get into the Army?
After I graduated from high school, I worked 1 year for the Santa Fe Railroad as a roundhouse foreman's clerk. And in the summer of 1918, the coach at Missouri Wesleyan College and the college president, who was then Cameron Harmon, and my coach was E.A. Lefty Davis, came to Marceline on a kind of a recruitment deal. I think my Methodist preacher had told them I played football. And they recruited me to play football, and that was in the summer of 1918. And I started college in September 1922.
Well, tell me about the Army.
The college in that year was taken over by the Student Army Training Corps, part of the Army. We went to classes in regular college work. We drilled in the morning an hour and a half, and in the afternoon an hour and a half. And because I played football, I didn't drill in the afternoon. We were college, and we were given basic infantry regulations and so on, and we learned that. And a part of it was that basic information, and part was selection of possible Army officer candidates. And I happened to be one of 3 that was selected for the officer's training. And I was home, supposedly for my last time, before I went to officer's training camp, the day the armistice was signed, November the 11th, 1918. But I thought, now we'll go back, they'll give us training, round us out, and we'll go overseas and relieve the men over there. But by January, December, we were discharged from the SATC, and it was closed out. And I never did go to officer training camp. I did go back to college, however, and finished out my semester's work, and I got a semester's credit for it. And I decided I was going back to college. I liked to play football, and I decided I wanted to get a college education.
Now, when you were in this student training Army, what sort of things did you do on the drill in the morning?
Well, I really can't tell you. We of course were out on the football field where we drilled. I remember marching down the main street of Cameron, but I really don't remember now specifically any drills that we did.
Was this marching in a parade?
Well, I suppose in halt or something like that. Turn around, turn around. I don't remember.
Close order drill.
Miss what?
Close order drill.
Yeah, maybe that'd be a post-army drill. All right.
Do you remember what kind of insignia you had on your collar?
Well, it just said SATC, as I remember. Is that what you boys found it? In there, so. Did you see, was the insignia in there on the collar? I thought so. Now, how I happen to have that this long, I don't know. My wife is interested in the Historical Society, and I was, but I kept it while I was at home, and it went with me all the time, hanging apparently on the closet. And when sometime or other Tom said well, they had some Army uniforms in there. And I said, well, I have one. And so I brought it, and they put it in there. But I remember that was on the Army insignia on the collar. And it was nice uniform. It was nice short coat. We were given our overcoats, I remember, along with some other Army clothes when we were discharged.
Do you remember Liberty Bond drives?
Yes, I remember Liberty Bond drive, but I don't remember having been called upon to do very much about that. But I do remember the Liberty Bonds, and I think in the Army, I think I bought some Liberty Bonds.
Do you remember any kind of scrap drives or victory gardens?
Well, no, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't have any idea there.
Or how did the war affect you as a student other than training?
Well, I really can't say that it affected me differently. We were in the Army. We were in college. We had the same college or social events, although we couldn't dance at the Methodist College. We didn't dance. We had society called, or like fraternities. We didn't have fraternities either. But just as a part of college, we were going, and we were barracks in the college building, and we were in the Army, and we didn't, no special treatment from the college, just regular college.
Was there any kind of rationing?
No rationing we had. We were all served in the college dining room, and I don't remember any rationing. No, that is there at the college. Now, there might have been some, but I don't remember.
You remember some of the celebrations when the war ended?
Well, at home, when the armistice was signed on November the 18th, I remember the whistles blowing and that I don't remember any. I suppose it was done at my thing, but I really don't remember. Just again took it in course. She's over.
Any questions?
No, not particularly about War II. The people he met there in that school came to this school, Lefty Davis and others that he mentioned, and he served with them here at this university. Lefty Davis was director of athletics here for a couple of decades, I guess.
No, I didn't hear that.
I was telling you that you met Lefty Davis.
Oh, yes.
And others, first when you were there in school.
Yes.
And then a couple of years later, you came up here.
That is, yes.
And worked with them.
No, my coach at Missouri Wesleyan, E.A. Davis, later was coach here in Maryville. And in fact, he was football coach when I came to the college in 1928 as principal of the Horseman High School, or college high school then, and teacher of secondary education. I taught secondary education classes to high schools. Prospective high school teachers, the ones that had in my classes were those that are planning to go ahead and teach in a high school. And we had a high school here on the college campus. We pioneered transportation in northwest Missouri. We had bus routes going out of Maryville in each direction. And at our peak, we probably had 150 students, and most of them were brought in from the country. And then in 1951, I think it was, when Missouri passed the new school law, by which the school district expanded. The rural school districts were brought into the town districts. The rural districts around Maryville were brought into Maryville. So there was no longer a need to go out and get the students out there because they were provided education at Maryville. So our high school then went on with what came to us otherwise, and we closed the high school in 1969, or 60. See, I might be wrong on that. But I had some what we call class visitation, supervision. I'd go out where a student teacher is teaching, and I would visit him and confer with him about his work and so on.
How long did you work at the university here?
I worked for 41 years.
41 years.
Came from 1928 to 1969. 41 years.
You worked with athletes. Worked with athletes and refereed ball games.
Well, yes, that was my extracurricular activity. When we didn't have student teachers, and even when my own boys were playing, and we had six-man football up there. You probably haven't heard about that. I played in small schools, six-man football, and for 20 or 25 years, I was Missouri's representative on the National Football Rules Committee. I was a member of the High School Activities Association Board of Control here in Missouri for 36 years. They say that's a kind of a national record. But when we didn't have any student teachers, I coached six-man football. And also, through my contact with the National Football Rules Committee, I taught six-man football in Kansas, New York, Oklahoma, and one more state in summer coaching schools. I went out and taught six-man football to their coaching school.
Back when you were in college playing football, how does that differ from when you were playing until today?
Well, it was quite a little bit different. First of all, if are you still on?
Yeah, go ahead. That's good.
All right. First of all, if a substitute was sent in, he couldn't talk till after the first play. And when the balls went out of bounds, there was no 10-bounds inbound spot. It was put right at the edge of a yard-in wall. So there's six men on the side of the center on the field. And there were other rules that I don't remember.
Do you have any particular game that you remember when you were playing?
Well, I suppose our main rival at Missouri Wesleyan was William Jewell College down in Liberty. And often we played it on Thanksgiving Day. And a time or two, our Thanksgiving game was the championship game for the MIAA conference. Now, back in those days, the MIAA, Missouri Intercollegiate Athletic Association, was composed of the 5 state colleges, Cape Girardeau, Springfield, Warrensburg, Maryville, and Kirksville, and Rolla. And later, the other colleges went into it, and then they expanded as it is now, with William Jewell and Tarkio and Central and so on in the same league. But I think the last game we played, I believe, against William Jewell for the championship we won it, I think, was 7-0. But in a couple of years, our school won this MIAA championship. One year, we were only scored on once. Now here's something that people think, well, that guy's bragging, but we weren't scored on. Springfield did that.
That'd be something to brag about.
Well, I played, not then, I was playing defensive fullback. But one year I played next to the biggest man in our field, 225, and I was playing offensive guard. And I wasn't very big, 100 and maybe 65 or 70. But that's what I played at maybe 75.
Do you remember when, during the war, how that affected people of German ancestry, or were there any German descendants in this area?
Now, this is something. First of all 4 of my grandparents came from Germany, and one of my grandparents' home, they spoke German, and I can remember going up and speaking German. Anything that I didn't want to hear or didn't want me to hear, they'd speak German. And then this is interesting. In 1913, when I started high school, at Marceline High School, they had a course in the German language. But it was the year of the war, and they took out the German language. We didn't have it that year. We had Latin instead. And I went ahead and took 2 years Latin. And later on, when I came to college, I took French. And when I went to work for my doctor's degree, which I didn't quite complete, I had to have French reading knowledge. And I had that from what I got in college, French. I learned to read it. But they took, and I remember that the teacher of the German had come from Kirksville, and she was a nice lady, and I was hoping she taught German, but I've forgotten what she did teach. But now that's an example of something that I remember that was done. Now the other things I don't remember too much about.
Now, with you with the German name, did it affect?
Yeah, that's right. My name Dietrich, and my mother's name was Saar, from Saar River, and my grandmother on one side, name of Faith, F-A-E-T-H, and on the other side, Lichau, L-I-C-H-A-U. Now, and I don't know the backgrounds of any of that. One time we were in Germany, wife and I, and we tried to see if we could find, but we never did locate any of my prospective relatives.
But I mean, having a German name, did that cause you any trouble?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I just say old Dietrich, that's all. Never was I called Dutch or anything like that. Never called Dutch. No. And Herb. My first superintendent called me Hickory. Hickory. But that was because of a guy around town that was called Hickory.
Can you remember any other incidents that you want to relate about what you've seen happen around here?
Well, gee. Yeah, that's a
Broad question.
yeah, that's of course, I remember, and not again say specifically, our college activities and especially the athletics. We'd had good teams in football and the prime back when we had Henry Iba here as our coach in basketball, and of course our academic work has been the top here in this area, and I can't say the top, but up in Missouri, we'd be proud of. Well,
Anything else that happened in Maryville while you've been here?
well, no, and again, not big enough that I might have thought more if it had the wording of this, but but I hope I've made enough for you to make a pretty good presentation.
I think it has.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I appreciate it. Now you say, Tom Cornelius said to go get old Herb. Dickens he did. Well, I won't hold this against him, or you guys either.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
What they'd be saying, well, how in the heck did you get yourself worked into that? That's what they want to know about.
I've enjoyed visiting with you.
Well, thank you all. You have a little background on me.
Yeah, just a little.
One of the things that today, I had a guy, and I've forgotten right now his name, college students and high school students. Eugene Dorn. Did you ever remember any of the Dorns? Eugene Dorn.
That sounds familiar.
Well, he's here. And I had a boy just this last week that came in to me from California. He'd gone to my high school. He'd been in the Navy 30 years. And he came in here and he said, Mr. Dietrich, I want to tell you how much I appreciated and found that it meant to be being in the school and so on. And he's going to teach school, and he said, I'm going to be able to tell him a lot of things about when I went to school. He grew up, his name was Gall, and he came from up around Wilcox. But that's some of the compensation for teaching. Might have been we didn't get rich, but we didn't get rich, but we weren't poor.
I remember an awful lot of it, and it's been 43 years since I left here.
Well, there you are. See? There you are.
Left the guard and left.
Yeah. See, you were left here 2 years after I came.
Did you ever have any connection with the Guard?
Have any what?
Connection with the National Guard?
No, I never have. Except some of my students that went to the Guard, and maybe I wanted to help them make up work or something that I do, but nothing more.
Okay. Well, we better let you go here. So you
Yeah,
can,
because you're going to get maybe too tired.
I didn't say, in there somewhere, both my boys were in World War II.
Oh, yeah?
And the younger one enlisted in the Air Corps, and he was in Austria and Germany. And the older one was in the Signal Corps and spent a good deal of his time in India.
What were their names?
Herbert Jr., and he was professor at Wyoming University for 37 years, and he just retired. And the other one was John, and he was Jack, and he was in the U.S. Forest Service for over 30 years, and he was in the fire control, prevent forest fires and put them out, and he was out on some big ones. And he lives now in Tempe, Arizona.
What did he do in World War II?
Well, he was the one that was in Austria. He was in the Air Force, not a flyer. But in Austria and Germany, and he went on the GI Bill. Now this is something that the GI Bill did for us. He went to Colorado State for his completed college education, and Herb went to Kansas University. Now that's a little more.
Yeah.
You may have to edit that some.
You liked the GI Bill. You thought it did something.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was fine, and I think what they're doing now. And I heard something the other day from somewhere where it said, and I knew this, where it said some of the Army men, they had to get food stamps, saying that the Army wasn't paying families enough that what they had to get food stamps. Now, I don't know what a basic infantryman, or what they call him, gets now, his pay, but would one of them, if they had enough family, have to get food stamps? Would you know?
I can't answer your question, but I've been hearing the same thing, that there are some low enough paid that they can qualify for food stamps.
Yeah, well, if the family gets up, I guess.
Several people.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
We'll start again with you stating your name.
Edwina Forsyth Condon.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Maryville, 1909, May the 1st. A May basket.
Okay, and then who were your parents?
Luther E. Forsyth and Bess Mishaw Forsyth, M-I-C-H-A-U.
And what was her maiden name?
Bess Mishaw.
Bess Mishaw, okay. And what did your parents do for a living?
My father had the Forsyth Packing Company, And my mother was a homemaker, just in the home.
And when did, well, I see it started out with your school. You went to school here, I assume.
Yes, I went to kindergarten at what was then the Normal, which is now our state university. And then I went to public school. At that time, we had 3 ward schools in Maryville: Jefferson, Garfield, and Franklin. They went the first 3 years, and then from 4th grade on, you went to what is now middle school, and you went from 4th grade through high school there, which I did.
Now, when you were going to school, you remember what it was like when World War I was declared?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that was the first unhappy occurrence in a very happy life up until then. And yes, we were all very excited about the war. And my father became, it wasn't called a war, but he became a member of the State Guard, which they had at that time.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I remember when the boys would go off to war, we children and young people would follow them down to the railroad station carrying flags and singing to them. And oh, there was a lot of interest in the boys who went off to war.
Did they leave here by a train?
Yes. We had 2 trains at that time, Burlington and Wabash. And I have a real interesting account of those trains. In the year I was born, you could go to Kansas City for $3.25. And they had a train up and down each night on the Burlington and one on the Wabash, plus a freight train. Of course, now we don't have any.
Huh. Do you remember anything like rationing or Victory Gardens?
Yes, remember all that.
Oh, tell us about that too then.
Well, we were very much rationed. As I remember, sugar and I remember more about rationing in World War II. I was kind of little in World War I. I don't remember too much about that, only that we had it.
What about the Liberty Bond rally?
Oh, yes. That was very much a big thing. And as a child, I swept the sidewalks at our school, and the janitor paid me a nickel or a dime, and the whole thing was to save money for the war orphans. We were buying war stamps and so forth. Oh, we were all very much alerted to the war. And I remember my grandmother Forsyth had a big map of Europe, and I would go in, and every day we would take pins and pin on the map where the forces were and what was going on.
Huh.
Yeah, much excitement over the war.
Do you remember what effect it had on people with German last names here?
No.
Okay.
I don't remember that there was ever much animosity about race in Maryville. Even with the blacks, we had had black help, and everything was very harmonious.
Do you remember if there were black troops recruited for World War I?
Here? Well, I imagine some of our boys went, but there wouldn't have been enough here to make it a noticeable thing.
And then when did you first meet Ed Condon?
When I was a very little girl. I was always in love with Ed from the time I first laid eyes on him. Never had another sweetheart. That's one thing Harry Truman and I had in common. Mother laughed and said when he was in high school and I was a little girl and she would take me into the shoe store, I wouldn't let anybody else wait on me.
Oh, he worked in a shoe store?
As a kid in high school. And he was working in a shoe store in Kansas City when he enlisted in World War I.
Yeah, that was my next question. Had he had any connection with the Guard or military service prior to World War I?
No.
Okay. Maybe you can just tell me a little bit about when he went into World War I.
He enlisted with some boys from the shoe store where he worked in 1917. And the rest of it is all in this Meritorious Service Award, listed all the dates and all the ways he served and everything. I think you'd have more information by just taking a picture of that.
Yeah, we'll do that later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But could you tell me anything about Battery D then?
Yes, Battery D was commanded by Harry Truman when they got overseas. They met in France, and the battery was, I guess, a rather rambunctious bunch, sort of uncontrollable. They'd had several captains, and Harry Truman was sent in to settle them down, which he did. Almost immediately, he busted a few officers and made it very plain that they had a job to do and were going to do it. And he apparently was a very fine leader, had the great respect and love of his men. And they fought in all the major battles, many of the major battles of the war.
But your husband was in Battery D from the beginning?
Yes. Well, I don't know when he enlisted that it was in Battery D. I don't know, but it was certainly Battery D when he was overseas from the time of Harry Truman on.
It's the 129th Field Artillery.
And the record is on here of about all that prior to this.
Okay. Then after World War I, you told me the other evening that he was instrumental in the reactivation of the National Guard.
I don't think he was responsible for its reactivation. It was reactivated here in 1923, and Kyle Fairs was the captain. But very shortly after it was reactivated, Ed was taken in and made a first lieutenant. And then he became captain, within a year or two after he was taken in. And it was sort of interesting, the battery was originally cavalry horse-drawn. And it was mostly veterans of World War I. And while Ed was captain, it became motorized. And it became a battery of mostly college students. It was very interesting when we went in the service. We had almost all of the State College's basketball team and some of its brightest men.
Did he ever say why he went back into the military at the time?
You mean when he first became interested in the battery after the war? He just had sort of a fascination for it. He was interested in it. And he was very interested in young people and working with young people. And this was the source of many of them going to college. The money they got from the National Guard paid for their tuition and helped them through college. We had some very interesting boys, and a great many of them turned out to be quite successful. As, by the way, did the men in Battery D. Many of them became prominent lawyers, prominent entrepreneurs, very interesting men.
Later on, I'll probably have you expand on that.
Okay.
And when were you married?
We were married in our family home on 1st and Main. September the 26th, 1928.
28. Okay, so he had already been back in the National Guard about 5 years by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And you were telling me you recalled when it was horse-drawn.
Yes.
Did they maneuver around the streets of Maryville here? Or how did you see?
Well, they were in all the parades.
Okay, parades.
And then, of course, they went to summer camp every summer.
Did you ever visit summer camps?
Yes, I was at Fort Riley.
Oh, okay.
And I was in Chicago when they camped on Navy Pier the summer of the Chicago World's Fair.
Well, tell us about that. That sounds interesting.
The 128th Field Artillery was an orphan regiment, I believe they called it. It wasn't attached to a larger organization. And so I don't know how the invitation came, but the regiment was invited to camp on Navy Pier for 2 weeks during the World's Fair, which they did.
So when he reactivated the Guard here, it was the 128th Field
Right.
Artillery. In
Right, right.
World War II,
After World War One.
after World War II.
Yes.
128.
And this was Battery
C
C.
C
here.
battery.
Okay. He was in D in World War One.
Right. C here.
128th after.
Right.
Okay. But tell us more about the World's Fair and what was it like to see all that?
Oh, it was wonderful. I remember the fan dancer was quite one of the outstanding things, and then television was being introduced.
Really?
Just the very first beginnings of the thought of television, in its infancy.
Huh.
And there was much to see and much excitement. Chicago itself was exciting to a little girl from the country.
What did the Battery do exactly there?
I don't know. I think the purpose was just to have a setup of the military that people could see, and there was no particular purpose that I know of.
Was that considered their summer camp, do you suppose?
Yes, it was. And they camped mostly at Fort Riley, but they also camped in Minnesota one summer. And
So did you visit several summer camps?
I visited Fort Riley and Chicago, and not any of the rest of them that I recall.
Was it common for other family members to come and visit during summer camps?
Oh, I don't think a lot of it was done.
Okay.
But it was certainly all right, mostly on a weekend, maybe something like that. It really wasn't much point in it because they were so busy, you didn't see them anyway. They were occupied every minute. They really had quite intensive training. And there was a General Rumbold who gave a trophy to the outstanding company. They were all vying for that. And Battery C won it many years. I think, of course, I think they were the best battery in the regiment.
Let's see.
No partiality there.
Maybe we could list the other batteries in the regiment. Did you know?
We had 2 battalions.
Two battalions.
C and D, E, and F batteries.
C,
And
D,
2
E, and F.
headquarters. 1 headquarters for each. Headquarters and service for each battalion.
Okay.
We had a battery in Burlington Junction, one in Albany. And it's a real interesting thing. We had, when we had inspecting officers, we always entertained them, and they came once a year. We had some interesting people. General and Mrs. Williams came one time and were our guests.
Now you mentioned this Rumbold trophy. Could you tell me what that was exactly?
Firing efficiency.
Was that connected with the Adjutant General Rumbold?
I assume.
I expect that was the same man, because it's an unusual name. There was a lot of pride and esprit de corps, and the men were interested in doing well. Ed was so very happy because when we got to Fort Jackson, one of our men tested the highest of anybody there, regular Army or anybody, in intelligence, on intelligence tests.
AGCT test.
Mm-hmm.
AD?
AGCT.
AGCT.
Army General CT, I'm not sure what that's for.
Okay. And where was the armory located when it was reactivated here in the 20s?
The first armory that I remember, and I don't remember where they kept the horses, but the first armory that I remembered was on 3rd and Buchanan, right across from our present Christian church. I think there's a
It's just a parking lot now.
Oh,
there's a light company there, has a building on part of that lot. And then they were where the Chamber of Commerce and the License Bureau is now, right next to City Hall. And then we had the new armory out on the college grounds.
that was in the gymnasium.
Well, before she's talking about the Armory, I showed you this morning, it was built a few years later. We actually used the gymnasium for an armory the first
I never knew that.
7 years.
I never knew that.
Battalion had headquarters upstairs and battery headquarters, but we used a drill floor. And Ryland Milner was always worried about our boots leaving marks on the playing floor, and he was very conscious of that.
Well, when would that have been?
Well, we organized, had federal recognition the 20th of October, 1947.
Oh, of course, that's when we were in the service.
47 when we reactivated here after the war. And I can't tell you what year exactly, but I was a battalion officer for 5 years and then left. And it was a year or more after that when the Armory was completed.
Yes.
General Truman, or President Truman came for the dedication.
Now, you see, the reason I don't remember that is that's when we were in Washington, D.C. We were away from 1940 to 53.
That's right.
Okay.
So I don't know anything about that.
We'll get into that period here a little bit. But before we moved on, well, we were telling about that armory where City Hall is.
Yes.
You know what?
And I don't know that, I don't know that address. I don't know that street.
Market and Fifth and Market.
You know what year they moved in there?
No.
Okay.
Approximately 37.
Okay. And they didn't use that until they went to the gymnasium?
No, they used that till they were inducted. They were inducted from that location.
Oh, so
in
just 3 years.
1940, November of 40.
Okay.
November 25th, I believe it was. And
Okay. But I don't want to miss the drugstore here. Now, you told me that he had a drugstore downtown.
Yes. After Ed came back from World War I, he and a boyhood friend, Theodore Robinson, whose father was president at that time of the Nottoway Valley Bank, decided to go into business together. And they looked around for different businesses to buy in Maryville, and this drugstore was for sale by a Mr. Nielsen, and they bought that and went in business there. 1923. And it was the Maryville drugstore until we came home from the service in 1950. In the meantime, Theodore Robinson had died. His wife was Ed's partner and sold out to us, and it became Condon's Corner Drug. So Ed was actually in business on the same corner, 4th and Main, for 51 years.
And you might tell us about the Cokes.
Well, he was very famous for never raising the price of coffee or Cokes, always a nickel a glass or a nickel a cup. And after he died, I had a very interesting letter from the Coca-Cola Company saying, as far as they knew, his was the only place that still sold nickel Cokes.
Cokes for customers while he made a fill a prescription.
Right, and gave them free to customers while he was filling prescriptions.
Then I wanted to get into the college boys would be given loans if they went to college. How did that work?
Well, I didn't know that Ed had any dealings with the bank about it, as Colonel Wilson has said, but the boys did borrow money on their National Guard pay to go to college, and Ed often signed for them.
I see. That's where he came in.
Uh-huh. And he never lost a penny. My father was very critical of his doing that. He thought it was very unwise business program. And my grandfather, Mishaw's father, had been a very well-to-do man and was broke by signing notes for friends. And my grandfather, Mishaw, would never go on as security for anybody. So we kind of had that in the back of our minds, but Ed got along fine with it.
So, any idea how many fellows got college educations that way by being in his back?
Oh, I would have no idea, but many, many.
Battery strength in peacetime was 60 men. Went to 98 in war strength.
Okay. And then last night you told me that Harry Truman started his Senate campaign here in Maryville
Right.
in 1934. Maybe you could tell us about that.
He was coming to Maryville to begin his campaign, and we invited him to be our house guest. And there was such a feeling in Maryville against him at that time that people said to my husband, "Oh, you shouldn't have him in your home. It'll hurt you business-wise," and so forth. Well, of course, Ed's comment was that he had served under him in the war, and he knew what kind of a man he was, and we thought highly of him, so he came, and that was the first time that I got really well acquainted with him, and we admired him very much. And after he had given his talk that night, he and Ed came home, and it was a beautiful night. We sat out in the backyard, and I heard them reminisce about the war. It was one of the most pleasant evenings I ever had.
Remember anything they said? Or?
Oh, just talked in general about it. And Ed was always so anxious to go back to France.
He made a comment the other night about Truman's relationship with Pendergast, and this is why the businessmen...
Oh, yes, very much so. Tom Pendergast, of course, had supported Truman, had picked him, really, to run. And the thing that many people didn't ever know was that Tom Pendergast's nephew was one of the Battery D boys. And he was the one who urged his uncle to do something to help Harry. See, when Harry Truman came back from war, he went in the haberdashery business, and he failed. And the interesting thing about it is, as McCullough brings out in his biography of Truman, is that he was urged to take bankruptcy, and he wouldn't do it, and he paid back every cent of that indebtedness, and was known to be a very honest person. And of course, when he went to Washington, he was called the man from Pendergast. Mm-hmm. But he quickly made his way, and as head of that Truman Investigating Committee, he became very famous.
When he launched his campaign here, do you remember the festivities or celebration? Or
yes, there was a nice gathering at his. I think Missouri is considered a Democratic state. I think Maryville's always been pro-Democrat.
Where did this rally take place?
I think at the courthouse. I'm not positive. I didn't go to the rally, but I think that's where it was.
It was on a Monday, and he spoke to the battery in formation.
Oh, that same day?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
That's where I first saw him.
Oh, you were here
in
too?
The battery.
Yeah.
A member of C Battery.
Yeah. Okay. Did Truman come back to Maryville before he was president? From 34 to 44, that 10-year period?
I don't remember that he came back during that time, but he came here 2 or 3 times after he was president.
Had left in service in 40, so he wouldn't have been here after 40.
Okay. And then before I go on, you mentioned the band last night that joined the unit in the bandstand.
Yes, we had a very nice band, and Ralph Yaley conducted it, and went into the service as a regimental band when the battery went.
The battery is part of Service Battery, which was located in Burlington Junction, 18 miles from here. Yaley was a music store owner here in town, and teacher.
And a very fine violinist.
Huh. Now, when you went to the inauguration when Truman was vice president, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, it was very interesting. We were on the Truman's list for parties, and we went to all the parties for the vice president. So we met many interesting people. And then when we went to the inauguration, we were ushered in, and we sat right behind Edward G. Robinson, the actor, and in a section of famous people. And we watched with pride when our friend, Captain Harry, took the oath of office as vice president. We were shocked when they brought President Roosevelt out in his wheelchair. He looked so tired and so ill. And they lifted him to his feet, and he spoke for about 15 minutes after he had taken the oath of office. And then there was a benediction, and the military band played, and we went into the White House for the reception, met Mrs. Truman and Mrs. Roosevelt, and it was a very interesting experience. We met the Truman family, his brother, and those of his family who were there. And then a group of us were invited to go on the little railroad that runs from the Senate to the Capitol, and be there when Truman presided over the Senate for the first time. And that was very interesting. And afterward, the story is that he called his mother and asked if she saw it on television. And she said yes, that she had seen it. And she said, "Now, Harry, you be a good boy." He said, "Mother, I will." She was a very matter-of-fact little soul, and his devotion to her was very real. In fact, one of the things I admired most about Harry Truman was his great love for family. He was devoted to his mother, he was devoted to his wife and daughter. And
did you ever meet his mother?
No, but she did visit Washington. And when she landed, there were a lot of press media around with cameras and everything, and her comment was, "Oh, shucks, if I'd have known there was going to be this much to do, I wouldn't have come." And of course, she was just a born-in-the-wool Southerner and Democrat, and she wouldn't sleep in the Lincoln bedroom. She didn't stay very long in Washington. I don't think she cared much for it.
Now, kind of take me through when the battery was inducted for World War II and your husband's career from that point in the military.
Well, when the battery was inducted, the big problem with our family was, would we go? The families could go. They were inducted for a year's training, you see. We didn't know they were going to go on to war. And I didn't know whether to take my son and daughter out of school and be with my husband or stay here, but I soon decided the thing that was important was for us all to be together. So we flew to Fort Jackson, and we lived there with the Tom Holdens from Albany. He had the Albany Battery. And we were there until Ed was transferred to Camp Blanding, Florida, and then to the National Guard Bureau. The former colonel of our regiment, Colonel Williams of Columbia, was the new chief of the National Guard Bureau, and he had Ed come to the National Guard Bureau, and we were there for the rest of the war. And that's how we resumed a lot of our friendship with Harry Truman. He was United States Senator at that time when we went to Washington. And then, of course, became president. This is when Ed called on him right after he became vice president, and it's autographed to Ed.
Let's see if I can swing around and get that.
year of the year, about 54. He was working in Jeff City at that time as a United States Property and Fiscal Officer.
They were from Vermont.
What did your husband do in the Guard Bureau exactly?
I think he was head of personnel, and he handled all the affairs of the state guards after the
Director of Administration Personnel.
after they had the regular National Guard had gone to war.
Is that the job he maintained for the rest of the time he was in Washington, D.C.?
Yes. And he served under 3 generals, including Williams.
You remember the names of all 3? Or?
No, there are 2 of them. I don't remember them.
It's okay. In one of the books on Truman, there was listed a director of National Bureau Standards, Dr. Ed Condon. Is that a different?
That was a first cousin.
Okay.
That was Dr. Edward U. Condon, and he was head of the Bureau of Standards. His father and Ed's father were brothers, so they were first cousins. We never knew him personally. His father and mother had divorced when he was a child, and the mother had prejudiced him very much against his father, and his father hardly knew him until he became a man and they became friends. But we never looked him up, but he was head of the Bureau of Standards when we were there, and there was a great deal of criticism about him at one time that maybe he had communist tendencies because he had a foreign wife. And I have a letter someplace from Harry Truman to Ed saying, as soon as I found out he was your cousin, I knew he was all right. I never worried about that. But he was a very brilliant man, and he was on the first UFO committee to find out if UFOs were really real. And all of his children are academically high, professionally. Most of them are professors. He was very bright.
And, what was Washington like, and what happened to your home here when you moved?
We rented our home here to a Pan Am captain who was here stationed with a Navy Navy flight program that was going on at the college.
B-12, I think it was called.
And it was a sad experience. They practically ruined the house.
Really?
It was a wreck when we came home. But what else did you ask me there?
Well, what Washington was like when you...
Oh, now there's a book by David Brinkley on the wartime years in Washington that describe it perfectly. It was a city, a calm little city that was preparing for war, and there certainly was a lot of agitation and a lot going on, and it was a real experience to be there. I wouldn't take anything for those years in Washington. But I would recommend highly this David Brinkley book. I have it, and it tells exactly what we went through in those years.
Where did you live in Washington?
We lived in a new apartment project, which at the time was one of the biggest in the United States, called Fairlington. It was in 2 counties, Fairfax and Arlington. That's how it got its name, Fairlington. And we had a corner apartment. It was built in Williamsburg style. It was brick with white trim. It was a huge building, a huge project. We had a corner building with a full basement that could be used for a recreation room, first floor, and a second floor with 3 bedrooms, access to laundry facilities. It was very, very nice.
And then, did you have children by this time?
Yes, a son and daughter.
Okay.
Our son was in 4th grade when we went in the service in 40, and our daughter was in nursery school.
Last night you were telling me about when your son was in the Boy Scouts. And
Right, right.
Tell us that story.
Well, it was kind of interesting. He was invited to swim in the White House pool, and when he got home, I said, "You must write a thank you note to the president." And I sort of helped him with it. But I didn't check it before he mailed it, and he put a P.S. on it inviting the president to be an honorary member of the Flying Eagle Patrol of Troop 117 of the Arlington, Virginia Scouts. One day, my husband had a letter from the Boy Scout headquarters saying, what is this story that has appeared in Life magazine about Harry Truman being honorary member of your son's patrol? It's one of the most interesting publicity items the Scouts could possibly have. Well, we didn't want to say that it had anything to do with swimming in the White House pool, because we thought then all the Boy Scouts would think they could swim in the White House pool. So we simply wrote the fact that Ed had told Ed Jr. quite a lot about President Truman's leadership, thought he was a good example of a good leader, and that Boy Scouting was primarily designed to make leaders out of boys. So the Boy Scouts then chose Ed Jr. to be with the president when he signed the bill for the boys to go to France for the jamboree at the close of the war. Would you like to have me take that picture down?
Oh, okay. Then you could just hold it up on the...
Oh, I can't reach it. Sorry. Don't you get tangled up in that.
Be careful. I can trip very easily anymore. Which picture you wanting? This one?
No, that one, where he's with the president.
This.
Yes. You're going to have trouble too.
We'll just keep it. We'll just keep it down because
All
we'll
right.
shoot a copy of it later anyway.
And these are all Boy Scout headquarters, and then some senators and representatives that were there. And this is another Washington, D.C. Boy Scout with him. I don't remember who that was. Oh, President Truman signing the bill for use of a troop ship to transport our American boys to the 6th World Jamboree. And it was April the 14th, 1947. I've written on the back of most of these pictures what they are.
Good.
Okay.
I have all this material upstairs, but I have an immense amount of Truman memorabilia, and it's in that. If you want to see it, we can get it out, but I didn't.
We'll see how our time runs here. And then last night you were mentioning some of the names that came to you of members of the battery who had done well. There was a Graham who wanted to go to medical school.
No, that was
Lambert Miller.
yes, Lambert Miller.
Okay.
Oh, the Graham part of it is that he was the White House physician, General Graham,
Oh, okay.
and he had met Lambert Miller, and Lambert became his assistant and did research for him in writing a book.
But Lambert had been a member of the battery here.
Yes, and then was assigned to General Patton's outfit during the war, and he had quite a wonderful record militarily. Patton urged him to go regular Army, but he was interested in continuing his medical career. He was a good officer.
And you told me last night that your husband had arranged for him to transfer to...
Right, he was in school here and in the battery. When he told my husband he'd like to go to medical school, Ed said, well, let's see if we can't transfer you to Columbia, Missouri, and you can start at Missouri Medical School and be in the battery there, which was what developed.
And some of the other names you mentioned to me were Ogden.
Yes, he's the boy that tested so high on the tests that when we were first called into service. He became a professor, I think.
And Davis.
Yes, he was a boy that shined shoes and did anything to help get through college. And he became a teacher in a military school. He was quite good.
Now, was he one of the boys who lived in the armory?
Yes, he was.
Now tell us how that worked. What your husband had to do with that.
Well, it was the armory on 1st and 3rd. I mean Buchanan and 3rd that did that, and they had a big upstairs, and some of the rooms they had put up cots and let some of the boys sleep there.
And they were required to janitor.
Right.
This was so they could go to school.
Yes. Didn't have to pay room.
We were talking about Davis being a boxer.
Yes. We had many athletes in our outfit. As I told you, we had this basketball team, which I have a picture of. They were champions.
Well, maybe he could hand that to you. You could hold it up.
Right behind you. This was most of our college basketball team that went with us. And William Bills was the coach. He was an officer, wasn't he, at the time?
He was.
And he's had a successful career in California. Yes. The colonel of our regiment is pictured with the team, Colonel Berkshire.
Okay. Get you relined up here. And you also mentioned last night that Truman had come for the dedication of the post office here?
Yes, first came for the dedication of the armory.
Oh, okay. We can talk about that first, it'd be fine.
Yes, well, that was the most important. Margaret and Mrs. Truman came with him, and it was in February of 1955, I believe. I'm not sure about that date. I think so.
I believe that's right.
It was a bitter cold day, and the Kansas City Star called him and said, "Are you going to make the trip?" And his comment was, and he was quoted in the press, "Ed Condon is one of my battery boys. He's never let me down, and I'll be there." And they came, and Colonel Wilson's brother was a general at that time, and we had a very nice luncheon at the armory, and a very nice visit with the three of them. And then after we were alone, we took them to the drugstore. It was closed, and President Truman wrote a cute little thing out about a charge account, and we gave her some old-fashioned bottles, jars, that we kept hard candy in. We filled it for her. She was happy about those. And I have a lovely thank you note from both of them.
And then the post office dedication?
The post office dedication was later on. And Mr. Strong, Frank Strong, an attorney here, and the postmaster drove to Kansas City with Ed to invite the president to dedicate the post office. And he said he would come at Ed's invitation, and he did, and it was quite a nice celebration. I have pictures of that. I have copies of.
Which one of these dedications was it that your husband took the guns for a salute?
That's when he came for the post office.
Tell us that story about the guns.
Well, Ed just had the battery go out and give the presidential, how many gun salutes is it for the presidents?
21 good.
Yes, that was it. And it pleased the president. He commented on it.
And then you also mentioned that you were invited to the dedication of the Truman Library.
We certainly were, and that was one of our big thrills. And we went to the reception afterwards in the Truman home, which was most interesting, and we visited with Herbert Hoover and Eleanor Roosevelt, who were sitting side by side. And the place was full of dignitaries. It was most interesting.
And what was Mrs. Roosevelt like?
She was a fascinating person. I had had some contact with her when I was in Washington, D.C., because in order to have something constructive for our children to do while we were in the service, we went into Boy Scouting and Girl Scouting very heavily. Ed was chairman of a Boy Scout troop, and I had Girl Scouts and was chairman of the Arlington Girl Scout Camping Committee. We camped 2,000 Girl Scouts during the summer, brought in professional help. And Mrs. Roosevelt, as wife of the president, was president of the Girl Scouts. And she took her duties rather seriously and always had an annual lecture and meeting with Girl Scout leaders, and sometimes oftener. And I was very fascinated because Ms. Roosevelt, I think we would all agree, was a rather homely woman. But when she would speak, she just lighted up, and she had a wonderful way about her. And when you met her, she was just charming. She just made you feel that you were the most important person she'd ever known. And the soldiers and sailors felt that way about her, commented on what a thrill it was to meet her in a railroad station or an airport. She was really a charming person and, of course, very bright. I always felt so sorry for her because he was such a philanderer.
Let's see. And then when your husband's military service ended in 1953, what happened then?
Well, General Williams had said to my husband, "Colonel, you must find something to do in Washington, D.C., because having lived here, you'll never be happy anyplace else." But we came home, and that's when we bought our partner's interest in the drugstore, and it became Condon's Corner Drug, and Ed stayed there as head of it till he was 81.
81, huh?
That's when he retired. So 51 years, as I've said, in the same business on the same corner, which I think is almost unheard of nowadays.
Tell us a little bit about the house that we're sitting in here today.
Well, when we were married, my father and mother said they would love to have us share the old home with them and live there for a while until we decided what we wanted to do about building a home. So we lived 4 years in the home on Main Street with my father and mother, and we had our own bedroom, guest room, and living room upstairs. We had a housekeeper, and we had all of our meals together. When our son was 4 years old, I went to a club one day, and one of my friends said that she was very interested in this house. She would just love to buy this house. So I said to Ed, let's go out and look at it, and we liked it very much, so we rented it at first to see how it was going to work, and it had belonged to just one family, the Parchers, and he was a state legislator at the time the college was brought to Maryville. He had a lot to do with us having the college here. So we rented and we liked it, and we bought it. And it's unbelievable to think that we bought the house and 2.5 acres for $5,000. I can hardly believe that you can't buy a car hardly for 5 times that now. And then we did a great deal of remodeling and fixing it up, and I tried to keep it in the period of the house, but it was built in 1873, and we have loved it. Lived here always. So I've really just had 2 homes, the one on Main Street and this one. Which is unusual too.
Yeah.
Very few people stay put. I really feel like I have roots.
The Adjutant General Shepherd. We haven't covered that yet.
No, he was quite a close friend of Ed's. They had some fishing trips together and had some interesting times together. I think when the battery camped in Minnesota, I think that was one summer, they had a very good time. And I don't remember the date, but it was while we were in the service that General Shepherd died, and I don't think I ever knew of anything outside family deaths that affected my husband so much. He really was quite fond of General Shepherd.
There was a fish story he told me last night.
Yes, something in Minnesota about the general catching a small fish, and they slipped in when he wasn't there and put the fish in his bathtub in water. And they had a lot of fun with him about this huge fish he caught. One of the interesting experiences Ed had when he was in the National Guard Bureau was one of the generals under whom he served was General Kramer, and when he took trips, he often took Ed with him. And he made a trip, an inspection trip to Alaska, and took Ed, and they visited the governor. And they went fishing, and Ed caught a larger salmon than won the salmon derby that year, and took it to have it stuffed and framed. And when he got the dimensions of the framing and everything, we really had no place to put it. So they sold it for him, but he had an interesting experience. And they also flew all over Alaska with bush pilots, which I guess is the way to see Alaska. We took some trips with a fine touring company at one time, and one of the guides told me that Alaska he thought was more beautiful than Switzerland. And he said, I could take you to see places in Alaska that are just the prettiest in the world. We had always hoped to go back there, but we never did.
Now, you were in Alaska on a vacation? Or?
No, I wasn't there. This guy just told me that. As a matter of fact, it was on a Hawaiian tour. And I had breakfast with this guide one morning, and I was saying how much I enjoyed Switzerland on a trip we had made in '76 abroad, my daughter and her husband and I, after Ed's death. And he said, well, I could show you places in Alaska that are more beautiful. He thought it was a lovely, lovely state.
Do you remember any other adjutant generals besides Shepherd? Any stories about them or connections with your husband?
Ed always had very harmonious relationships with them. One of them retired in California, and we went to visit him after he retired. And their names are all here on these things. You can read them off. I don't remember them.
Okay.
I should. The thing that I have lost the most is my remembering names. I don't remember names well.
Well, is there anything you'd like to add, something that we've not covered or forgotten?
I can't think of it.
National Guard.
I can't think of anything. Only that my life has been a lovely experience, and wise was the person who said, God gave us memory so we could have joy and roses in December. And it's very wonderful to live each day and try to make it a happy day, because someday that will be a beautiful memory. And as we grow older, memories are more and more important. Hence, this room is so filled with memories.
This was his den or office?
This was his den. This was his desk in Washington.
Oh, really?
And he was able to, well, it's like his desk. He bought this from Army Supply before we left Washington. This was his, on his desk, and this was his nameplate for his desk. Many of these pictures were in his office.
Yeah, my,
Oh, the one thing I want to be sure and mention is the National Guard stamp.
okay.
One of the last things that Truman did before he left office was to authorize a National Guard stamp. They had been trying for years to get one, and Ed was the contact with the White House on this project. The stamp was authorized by Truman and came out in the Eisenhower administration, and there was quite a celebration about it at Mount Vernon. Of course, General Washington was our first National Guardsman, so they were chosen to have this stamp introduced at Mount Vernon. The first day of issue ceremony of a commemorative stamp honoring the National Guard of the United States was at 10 a.m. Monday the 23rd, 1953 at Mount Vernon. All of the press media was there, and it was quite a lovely ceremony. I have the stamp and the mailing on the first day of issue, and then this
May I take this other one?
Yes, you may. This is Postmaster General Arthur E. Summerfield presenting a special album of National Guard commemorative stamps to Secretary of Defense Charles F. Wilson at a ceremony held at Mount Vernon, February the 23rd, 1953. It was held on George Washington's birthday. It was one of the things of which Ed was very proud. And I have the letter from the National Guard News saying that Ed had a lot to do with it. But he was very proud of this.
I think that will conclude the interview part of it.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming.
I certainly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Maybe just shoot a couple things on this wall to put on the...
You may do whatever you'd like.
Okay.
Shall we hang these pictures back up first? Yes. I'll hang them up.
Well, he's going to take pictures of some of them.
Okay. You just tell me what you want done and I'll do it.
Yeah, just sort of painting this.
Do you want her to keep a mic on?
Probably not necessary right now.
How about my getting up and out of the way?